Imagine a world where you knew that you mattered and you belonged. The people cared about you because we were so darn good at listening to one another, no matter how different we are. That is what Sidewalk Talk is doing by putting listeners on sidewalks all over the world so that we can practice the art of connecting. Join me, founder and director Traci, as I interview experts on the fine art of human connection and interview some of our volunteers who've been listening on the sidewalk and even some of the folks that we've listened to. And if you want to volunteer, consider joining us at sidewalk-talk.org. Yeah, so I am thrilled that I get to be in dialogue and bring you along into this dialogue with Oren Jay Sofer. I've really dug his work for a long time. When I first heard of him through Dan Harris years ago, and then I'm a big fan of Joseph Goldstein, so knowing that Oren is a student of Joseph's. And then I'm really into NVC, Nonviolent Communication, and Oren's done this really cool thing. He's been a long time meditator and meditation teacher. But what I'm always craving is somebody who can speak to how you bring mindfulness and communication together, because so often mindfulness is a solo practice, and this is what he's done in a beautiful way. And he ain't wimpy when it comes to talking about social justice. And he wrote this piece, which is what had me pick up the phone and want to have a conversation with him. And this is going to be juicy, provocative, grounding, thought-stirring, and I hope that you'll go get his book, Say What You Mean, A Mindful Approach to Nonviolent Communication, because there's nothing that he's saying that's about waiting to be active, but it is about being skillful, and really stoked that we get to be in dialogue with Oren Jay Sofer. Oren Jay Sofer, what an honor to get to be in some connected dialogue with you here. And I'm so excited that all of our listeners get to meet you, because just before you and I hopped on this call, I told our New York City chapter leader, I'm going to speak with Oren later. And she didn't know who you were. And then she went to your Instagram feed. She goes, oh my God, this guy is great. And I said, I know.
That's sweet. That's sweet. Thank you.
So I'm going to just share with folks that, you have been somebody that has been a master in not only mindfulness, but nonviolent communication. And I want to know a little bit about you and your life and how this all began for you.
Sure. Traci, I missed a word. There was like a little hiccup in the connection. And so I missed the beginning of your question. Do you want to just repeat it?
Yeah. I want to know a little bit about you and your life.
Sure.
How this all began for you.
Totally. Well, it all goes back to family, right? So I grew up with a mentally ill family member, and that created a lot of emotional stress and volatility in my family of origin. And I very quickly took on the role of the normal one in the family, the one who's okay, I hold it all together, I don't need anything. And this is common for children, because children are very perceptive emotionally. We pick up on things when we're young very quickly and easily, and learn how to survive and fit within a system. And so I learned at a very young age to pretend, to pretend I was okay, to not burden others with my feelings or what I wanted, what I needed. And, we all, I think, learn some version of this in modern society. It requires people to disconnect from their humanity in order to be alienated from the fruits of our labor. Right? In order to work many hours for someone else and produce something that we don't own, we've got to cut off and feel okay about that. We've got to cut ourselves off from our heart. And so public education, media, the socialization process, to some degree, for many, if not all of us, disconnects us from our heart, from our how we feel and the deeper longings that we have. So fast forward, 10, 20 years, things started falling apart in my life in various ways. I was doing a lot of drugs, had falling out with friends that was related to that, broke up with my girlfriend at the time. In some ways, very normal stuff for a middle-class white kid growing up in America. Um, and then my parents got divorced. So everything kind of came crashing down in my world. And that led me to turn to spirituality of circumstances. I found meditation, ended up studying abroad in India as part of my college education. And it changed my life. I remember sitting there with the meditation teachers from India and talk about the Buddha's teachings and what he realized about being human and how and why we suffer, and how we can use our human life to maximize our potential and to benefit others. And there was this feeling inside of coming home, like, oh, this is why I'm here. Like, this makes sense to me in a deep and profound way. And later looking back, realizing that the deep spirituality that I was longing for so much as a child wasn't available for me in the Jewish tradition because of the huge loss of cultural and spiritual capital through the Holocaust and the displacement of Jews from Europe. And so I found some of that deep purpose and spirituality in the Buddhist tradition. And so over time, as I started practicing and meditating, there was a lot of transformation emotionally, personally, some healing. And a few years in, I started realizing that those transformations, the insight, the healing that I was experiencing wasn't translating into my relationships. I mean, it was great when everything was fine. But if I got into an argument with a coworker, I was working at a meditation center at the time as a cook, and we would get into arguments about how to cut the broccoli or, how long to steam the carrots. If you've ever worked in a kitchen, you know what I'm talking about. And I realized, okay, if this stuff isn't showing up in my life and my relationships, then something's wrong, because that's the point, right? The point isn't just to kind of close my eyes and be able to check out and feel good on my own. That's lovely if you can do that. But who does that actually help, and how does that help us live our life more? So it was about that time that I came across the work of a man named Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, who was the founder of Nonviolent Communication, which is much more than a communication technique. It's really an awareness practice. It's an awareness practice that helps us to transform the way we understand and relate to ourselves, other people, and the world through the lens of language and thought. And in many ways, it helps us to unlearn a lot of the socialization process that I was referring to earlier. So I found in that practice, and maybe I can kind of wrap up the very long-winded answer to your question here. I found in that practice a bridge between the spiritual practice I was doing, the kind of silent internal meditation practice, into my life in a way to express those values and stay deeply connected to them in the face of disagreement, hurt, anger, confusion, frustration, all of the very normal, natural things that come up for us as human beings in relationship, and how to put in practice through words and listening the things that are most dear and near to my heart.
I feel so sweetly connected to you, getting to
Mm,
hear your origin, really. And I
mm,
resonate with so much of your young life story for sure. I don't know
mm.
that therapists become therapists if we don't have something in our own pasts. And yet I also admire so much, Oren. You could have just used spirituality meditation to bypass
Right.
all the discomfort, but that wasn't enough for you.
No. Yeah. Well, I thank you. And I don't, I think that that's our nature. I think that we are compassionate creatures at heart. We're relational creatures. We depend on each other, right? We evolved in small tribes and bands and need cooperation and empathy to survive. And so when we see another in pain, if we ourselves are not consumed by anger, fear, pain, overwhelm, the heart's natural response is to reach out, is to say, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? What can I do?" So, you know, I just looked around and saw how much difficulty and pain there was in the world growing up, and you know, this is not enough. I need more, right, in order to feel whole. And I will say also that I connect some of that as well to the very deep value in the Jewish tradition for social action. It's very deeply embedded in the culture. And so I think that as well was there, just a strong value to use one's life energy to better the conditions of society. There's a huge value in the Judeo-Christian tradition, going back to the Hebrew Bible, of you judge a society based on how it treats its most vulnerable, and that it is how you relate to the stranger that shows your true values. And you know, those lessons that somewhat tragically and ironically are the foundation of so much of kind of white Christian American society are what we need more than ever today, as we see the kind of, not just in America but around the world, this sort of shift to far right-wing nationalism, xenophobia, demonization of immigrants, blame against those who are different, and this kind of radical othering where we lose touch with the humanity of other people. Yeah, and so, you know, the potency of practices like Buddhist meditation, nonviolent communication, and so many others that you explore and treat on this podcast, help us find our way back. How do we reclaim that connection and see the humanity of others, even when there is a narrative saying otherwise, or emotions that might bring hesitancy?
Yeah, gosh, there are pieces here that are so rich. I just want to highlight a few things.
Mm.
First, I have had the opportunity before Marshall passed away to get to train with him.
Oh,
I am
wonderful.
not certified in NVC, but being a couples therapist, I certainly admire and draw from, and all my favorite people are NVCers too. So maybe I should get certified at some point. But you said something about NVC that made it come alive for me in a way that it hasn't come alive when I've heard anyone else speak about it. You said it's an awareness practice.
Yeah.
And that really moved me. I wish that
Mm.
more people spoke about it that way,
Mm.
you know?
I got to give credit where credit's due. So that's that idea, and that phrase was from a colleague of mine, Kit Miller. And
Okay.
what she said, the actual quote is, um, NVC, nonviolent communication, is an awareness practice masquerading, is an awareness discipline masquerading as a communication practice.
Mm,
And Marshall was super clear about this. He talked a lot about the deep spiritual foundation of nonviolent communication, that he used a theistic framework, which
hmm
is not a framework I personally connect with, although I understand it and find it inspiring. He spoke about its potential to help us access the divine energy within each of us, and to be able to create the quality of connection and understanding we need with other human beings, to let that energy flow, and to have natural compassion, mutual giving from the heart arise.
mm. That's such a beautiful North Star to sort of think
Mm,
about. That's the North Star of NVC, because I sometimes feel like in the NVC groups that I'm in right now, we get so caught in the technique of it that we forget the North Star is this
yeah,
natural unfolding of the heart in the relationship that we're aiming for. So I appreciate
yeah,
that a lot.
totally.
I want to dig into the piece I said to you before we went live. I said, gosh, Oren, I read this blog post that you wrote that was really moving to me because it was so filled with humility, where you really took up racism in America. and in a way that I felt wasn't performative. It
Mm.
also wasn't tone policing, which I also think I'm guilty of at times. I think some of my colleagues are in the psychotherapy profession. There's either two extremes, the extremes of us tone policing because we should all
Right.
be empathic and nuanced, and so therefore everyone needs to be nice to each other all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or then there's the other extreme, which is we need to shame every person that isn't as woke as I am. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
somehow you found your way into this place of equanimity. And I just want to just be with you and hear from you on how you are being with the world right now as the
Mm-hmm.
realities of unresolved, unatoned for injustice in American culture is really in our conscious awareness now.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Thank you. It's a powerful question. How am I being with
I
our
mean, no
world? Yeah.
there's no pressure. You
No,
get
I
to be
know.
human just like me
Of
in this.
course. Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, there is a deep well of pain within me. Um that's not personal, that feels like touching something that is part of the fabric of the collective conscience. And I'm not okay a lot of the time. You know, I feel worried, sometimes frightened. Um, I live here in California where we have some of the worst wildfires in a century raging across the state, vast areas of land. The air has been difficult to breathe in certain places, certainly my home for some days. And so, this is just one, everything's connected, right? This is not separate from the legacy of racism. This is about our disconnection from reality, from our dependence on the earth and our relationship to nature, and the tendency of patriarchy and all of the subsequent forms of oppression to dominate and control. And it begins with I think, my view, it begins with the human relationship with nature and our attempt to control and dominate nature rather than to live in a relationship of humility and stewardship. So, for me, my practice is finding enough nourishment in life through anything and everything, moments with my partner, my own meditation practice, gratitude to my teachers, the beauty in nature, the simplicity of a cup of oolong in the morning, finding those moments of nourishment, doing my spiritual practice to stay connected to myself and aware. And then, as Thich Nhat Hanh has said so beautiful many times, not turning away from the suffering, actually turning towards it and learning to be okay with not being okay.
Mm,
That's what equanimity is about. It's not about not feeling or somehow having this kind of neutral stance towards tremendous tragedy and loss and pain and the history of violence in the modern world that continues to this day. It's actually about being able to open slowly and in a manageable and regulated way to those experiences without getting flooded, so that we can metabolize them.
mm-hmm.
And on a personal level, as well as on a collective level, I think that's one of the things that our world needs, is the willingness to turn towards that which is eating away at our hearts and our society, and begin to metabolize it, to begin to come to terms with it. And so,
Mm.
on a personal level, that's some of what I'm doing. Um, I think why don't I pause there? You can follow up. Yeah.
Well, I just I feel like you just created so much space for the fear and the anger in my own heart,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what I hear you saying is that the time that you take to generate equanimity inside of yourself so that your activism isn't motivated by a decentering kind of trauma helps, in a way, your activism to be more right action, right speech, right, just sort of right movement. And
Mm-hmm.
and that the work isn't to, I think I can be guilty of moving too quickly in order to avoid turning towards that which is hurting,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
hot potato my feelings, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah.
And so I really wanted to
Yeah.
highlight those few things that you said, because you're really saying, no, it's actually, your activism is predicated upon cultivating that equanimity.
Right. Which is predicated upon being willing to be with the discomfort. Right.
Beautiful.
Like that's when we talk about, if we talk about engaging with racism, unlearning white supremacy, unlearning male supremacy, whatever the dynamic of domination and oppression is that we are seeking to transform within ourselves, speak out against, and take action for in society, the movement, the movement of a response that is rooted in a different quality of consciousness, a different dynamic relationally, comes from, in part, our ability to be with discomfort, right? If we can't be with our own discomfort, then there is a part of our action and our response that is coming out of reactivity and control. I don't want this. I don't want to feel this. Therefore, I have to control what's happening, which tragically and ironically is a recapitulation of the same dynamic of oppression and domination. And we've seen this throughout history. I'm not a historian, I'm not a political science, but the little bit that I know and the friends of mine who are, point to many instances in history where revolution that was inspired by social revolution, that was inspired by beautiful ideals, ends up recreating a domination paradigm because the means was not aligned with the ends. And um, this is the ethos and the way of nonviolence, which is what the tradition that nonviolent communication comes out of. It's called nonviolent communication because Dr. Rosenberg understood this practice as a key component and a tool for radical social transformation, and that if we're unable to transform the perceptions of enemy images and blame in our own mind, and if we're unable to relate to one another from a different place with more empathy and humanity, then we run the risk of recreating some of the same systems and dynamics that we're actually seeking to transform and change.
Mm.
So equanimity, one of the greatest myths about, and this is a very strange word. If any of your
I love
listeners
it
are,
though, but yes.
if any of your listeners have not studied or heard Buddhist teachers before, it's like equanimity. What is that? It's a very odd word. It means balance. It means, Sharon Salzberg, the great teacher and friend of mine, she says equanimity is balance born of wisdom. So it's a quality of equipoise. And if you think about walking a balance beam or a gyroscope or a tightrope walker, balance is dynamic. It doesn't mean that we are in a fixed and rigid position where nothing affects us. It's actually quite fluid. It means that we are continually getting thrown off balance, but instantaneously readjusting. And so we don't arrive at equanimity. It's a practice. It's something that we learn to discover moment by moment by being deeply in touch with life. And part of being deeply in touch with life means opening to discomfort and pain, because that's what it is to be human. It includes that. It's not all, thankfully, but it's part of it.
Gosh, if there were a standout phrase that you've said in our conversation that feels like you're wanting to transmit. It's that we've got to learn to turn towards that discomfort and pain,
Right.
because if
Right.
we don't,
Right.
that's when we get rigid and oppressive and recreate these oppressive systems that have not been
Hmm.
great for the environment and for people.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think if we look at, you mentioned these polarities, these extremes in the in it sounds like you were talking primarily about like the left, between this kind of being very careful and tone policing and sort of woke shaming. And we could expand that to also then say, the other end of the extreme, where we see, certainly here in America, I'm not sure what it's like abroad, but a kind of the reaction to tone policing and being careful on the right of, you're suppressing free speech, and uh, this is a culture war, and kind of completely discounting the values and the reality of pain and suffering that those responses come
Mhm.
out of. I think both, all of those, we can look at any of those behaviors and see an aspect of them that is rooted in a reaction to discomfort.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I just learned something about the response from the right,
Mm.
or as my friends call them, mask holes. I told you I was irreverent.
Yeah.
That actually, that is the same. I'm sorry, I think in images. So I'm thinking of myself on the balance beam.
Hmm.
And then I'm thinking of myself saying, you're impeding my freedom by telling me
Right.
to wear a mask. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, I just got rigid on the balance beam and I'm going to fall off.
Hmm.
Like, I
Yeah.
really get it. I'm like, oh, that is a pain
Yeah.
response. That's not,
Exactly.
it's not about
Exactly.
politics or freedom. That's about pain and discomfort. And we make it about politics and all the other stuff because we don't
Yeah.
want to turn towards the pain, like you said. Is that right? Am
Yeah.
I getting it right? Sorry, I
Yeah.
had a little mini aha, Oren.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And the piece that I'm most interested in these days, just in kind of my own learning and evolution and growth, is that, so that perspective that we learn through practices like compassion meditation or nonviolent communication, where we train our minds to see the humanity in others. We train ourselves to see beyond the surface perceptions and judgments, and to actually connect first with what's going on for us. Where is my reaction coming from? What is the deep value that I hold that I feel is being challenged or at risk here, so that I have to defend myself and judge you in order to actually stay connected to and hold on to my value? So that's the first step, is connecting with ourselves, being able to identify, well, what's important to me here. It's like, oh, I want everyone to be safe. I don't want people to get sick and die unnecessarily from this virus, or I want, you know, my siblings in my community who are black or brown to be able to wake up and not feel afraid that if their children have an encounter with the police, that it might go south. So to identify our own values, but then to be able to see in the other person, okay, this person's response, their behavior, their view, their ideology, what is the deeper human value that they are feeling like they need to defend, that they are connected to? Not to justify behavior or agree with views, but to see beyond that. So that's a very clear practice to me on the personal level. And where I'm pushing my own edges and trying to grow and learn is, how does that translate into social action? Because I don't think we have time, given everything that we're facing politically, economically, environmentally around the globe, to for everyone to wake up individually and have personal transformation change our world. It's possible, but there's not enough time. The forces that we're facing are too great. And if we wait for that, I don't think we will survive on multiple levels. And so this is where, the movement for social change can be rooted in that sense of deep humanity and nonviolence, but the tactics need to be different. The strategies need to be different. And this is, studying Kingian nonviolence, civil disobedience, looking at policy change. This is where kind of larger movements and strategy need to be I believe, need to be informed by the perspectives of compassion and humanity. But the manifestation of that will look different. And
Mm.
I think that this is a trap. This is a gap that many that I know I was in for a long time, and that many spiritual practices fall into, which is, okay, if we just change enough hearts and minds, the world will be a better place. And maybe that was true at some point in time when there was more time available in terms of climate change and the survival of democracy in the face of uh, the erosion of democratic values and processes. But I don't think that's the case anymore.
Hallelujah. Thank you for saying
Mm,
that. I
mm,
have been wrestling with this one in my mind because I am quite willing to be provocative.
mm-hmm.
And you're saying, look, we don't have time to teach everyone how to get on that damn balance beam and stand
No,
in a lucid way. It means that there are
no.
going to be some people that are going to be on the balance beam that are going to be out with protesters, that are going to be engaging in civil disobedience. And then sometimes we're going to be enabling protesters that maybe aren't quite on the balance beam yet, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've got 11 and 12-year-old sons, one who loses sleep every night because he says, is there going to be an earth when
Oh,
I'm old?
oh,
And he gets really angry with me if I buy something wrapped in plastic. He goes, why
oh,
are you doing that? He goes, this is
yeah,
my life, man.
yeah. I have chills, Traci, just hearing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it means, making music and writing, and there's a role for each of us in the transformation, and it doesn't mean that each of us needs to be out in the streets, right? We need every voice and every response, whether it's phone banking and writing
Mm-hmm.
postcards here in the States to turn out the vote, and
Mm-hmm.
get more people registered in key places, or finding your own way of expressing and creating the kinds of spaces in society that are moving towards the vision of the world that we want to live in. And this is what's so inspiring about your work, and the ethos and the vision behind Sidewalk Talk, right? Is can we just sit down and listen to each other?
Mm.
Right? Can we start to create those connections? There's a beautiful story I heard once about I don't know if it was one or two people. I think it was one person who went around the world with a sign, "American willing to listen."
Maybe I need to do that here in Germany because I've gotten some blowback being American
Uh-huh.
living here
Right.
for sure. That's
Right.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, and if the circumstances of my life were different, and maybe outside of COVID time, I've I've had the had the impulse more than once to hit the road with a sign that says, "White dude willing to listen."
That's beautiful. And, I'll be a little political since we've been political here. When Justice Kavanaugh was being appointed, or I
Mm-hmm.
guess he was going through his hearings, we had
Mm-hmm.
25 white men, actually not all white, we had 25 men show up to hold space for
Mm.
female assault survivors. We held a
Mm.
listening space in Dolores Park in San Francisco. And
Right.
so
Beautiful.
totally resonate with all
Yeah.
of that. Super
Yeah.
cool. And,
Yeah.
just before you and I started talking, we've been thinking about how to maintain this organization as it's gotten so large to be more sustainable so that there's
Mm-hmm.
less barriers to entry.
Mm.
Because at this point, you kind of need money to keep the organization going. And one of the things that, you know, became clear was, we're confronting our why. Why are we doing this? And I
Mm-hmm.
realized it's because, so many listening things are about how can we find our common ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, actually, what we're about is how to celebrate the ground that isn't common between us
Mm.
and
Mm-hmm.
not try to move away from that discomfort to build
Right.
bridges too quickly. So
Right.
this whole time you've been talking, I'm like, oh my God, that's what I was just
Mm.
thinking about. So it's great. It feels
Yeah.
really supportive, and I
Yeah.
appreciate you getting what we do.
Absolutely.
So I could talk to you for days and days. But you have so many beautiful resources that you give away for free on YouTube. You've got so many amazing online workshops. So I want to say to folks, please go stalk Oren on his website, as I have done, and for sure pick up his book. We'll for
The
sure
name of yeah.
send things out to everyone, and when when the podcast goes live, we're going to email it to folks, and we'll be sure and have links to your book and to your website and to all of
Great.
your social feeds.
Oh, thank
You
you.
wanted to say the name of the book out loud?
Yeah. Yes.
I could flip the page.
Say what you mean. A mindful approach to nonviolent communication. Yeah, it's a step-by-step guide to transforming your conversations and relationships.
I think that as somebody who has had a version of this book on my Kindle now for a year, and flip through it in certain moments, I would also say that every married couple should go get a version of this book, and you've got lots of time together during COVID. So I know that there have been little moments where I'm like, oh, I should try it out with my husband. We have a bit of a ritual here on how we close our conversation, our dialogue. I mentioned to you that there are 8,000 listeners across 15 countries around the world, and this is where I'd like to step out of the way and invite you to speak directly to them, either a wish or words of wisdom as we close here together.
Sure. Well, my wish for each of you is first and foremost that you see and know deeply your own goodness and beauty, and that you never forget the wholeness of your own heart, that you can experience a deep sense of belonging here on this planet, and that from that knowing of your own goodness, your own profound connection with life, that you allow your heart to express itself, to respond to the pain and the suffering that's around us in whatever way is authentic for you. That's why we're here, is to dance, to be in this dance of life, of sharing the planet and sharing resources, not just with each other, but with all creatures.
Gosh, taking that in so much, so much. Oren Jay Sofer, may your days be well, may the fires recede, and may your journey on that balance beam continue to be supported.
Thank you. Thanks, Traci, and you, and everyone out there. Take care. Be safe, and hope to see you down the line.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you for being here and listening to this episode of the Sidewalk Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, tell your friends, tell your family, like and comment on the podcast publisher that you're listening from, and subscribe. This will help us get the word out about changing our culture to one of connection.